All right, so you're here with us on the deep dive. And let's be honest, you're here because you need to really grasp something pretty important, something that honestly might seem a little overwhelming at first.
Yeah, it can be a bit daunting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you need to understand it all pretty quickly too, right?
Time is precious.
Well, today, that something is the FASB Accounting Standards Codification.
Ah, the codification.
Yeah, the one and only. We're going to try to give you like a fast-track insider's guide to understanding the, well, you could say the backbone of US GAAP.
That's a good analogy.
Thanks. We've gone through a couple of key sources to help us do this. First, we've got some excerpts from the FASB themselves. You know, straight from the horse's mouth. It's their document, after all, called, well, about the codification. Pretty straightforward.
To the point.
And then we also dove into Joanne Flood's Practitioner's Guide to GAAP to get like a, I guess you could say, a more practical perspective, how it's used in the real world.
Right, because sometimes those theoretical explanations can leave you scratching your head a bit.
Absolutely. So our mission here today is not to, turn you into a codification guru overnight or
We're
anything.
now instant experts here.
But to give you a solid grasp of what it is, how it's all put together, and why it truly matters if you're dealing with financial reporting in any way, shape, or form.
The essentials, without getting bogged down.
Exactly. So let's just get right into it. What exactly is this FASB Accounting Standards Codification that everyone keeps talking about?
Well, to put it simply, it's the single source of authoritative US GAAP. Generally accepted accounting principles. This applies to all those non-governmental entities out there. And it became effective for periods ending after September 15th, 2009. Before the codification came along, the world of accounting standards, it was, well, a bit messy.
How so?
Well, think about it. It was kind of like having a bunch of different dictionaries and they're all defining the same word. But sometimes those definitions, they had subtle differences.
Leading to a whole lot of confusion, I imagine.
You got it. So the codification, it swooped in and brought everything together under one roof. It created consistency.
Ah, so it was a big simplification effort. All those different levels of GAAP we used to hear about, are those gone now?
Gone, gone, gone. Out the window. The codification, it superseded all those previous US GAAP standards from level A all the way to D. So now, if you're looking for guidance and it's not in the codification, well, it's generally considered non-authoritative. Plain and simple.
That's a pretty big deal. I mean, talk about making GAAP research a lot more focused.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what about the SEC, though? I mean, they obviously have a pretty big say in financial reporting, especially for public companies. How do they fit into all of this?
Oh, great point. To make the codification even more useful, especially for those public companies you mentioned, they decided to incorporate some key authoritative content from the SEC right into it.
Really? What kind of content?
Oh, it's things like certain SEC staff interpretations, some administrative guidance, things like that. You can think of it as like a curated collection of SEC insights that are directly tied to those GAAP standards.
So it's like a handy shortcut to certain SEC guidance, but it doesn't replace the official full SEC rules, right?
Exactly. The codification doesn't cover everything when it comes to SEC regulations. For instance, you won't find the nitty-gritty details about management's discussion and analysis or those specific rules about auditor independence. So public companies, they still need to, consult those official SEC pronouncements and filings for the complete unabridged version.
All right, I get it. It's not meant to be a total replacement, just a really helpful addition. Okay, so we've covered what's in the codification, that core US GAAP, plus some SEC insights. What about the things that are intentionally excluded? What won't we find in there?
Good question. There are a few important things that they decided to leave out. First off, you won't find any accounting methods that aren't actually GAAP.
So if a company is using cash basis or some other, special basis of accounting, that's not covered.
Nope, not in the codification. It's all about GAAP. Secondly, and this is important, it specifically excludes governmental accounting standards. Those are handled by a different board, GASB, they're called.
Got it. Different board, different rules.
Exactly. And lastly, you won't find what's called grandfathered content. This refers to any accounting guidance that was effective before July 1st, 2009, but it's not considered current GAAP anymore. So if you need to understand how a transaction was accounted for under those older rules, you'll have to go back to those pre-codification standards.
So it really is all about the current GAAP, huh? It's a living document that's keeping up with the times. But why even go through all the effort of creating this codification in the first place? I mean, it sounds like a truly monumental task. What was the problem they were trying to solve?
The main goal was to make research way more efficient. Imagine trying to find an answer about how to account for, say, a really complex financial instrument before the codification came along.
Oh, that doesn't sound fun.
You could be wading through hundreds, maybe even thousands of individual pronouncements, interpretations, staff positions, all that. It was incredibly time-consuming, and the chances of overlooking something important, well, they were pretty high.
Talk about a recipe for headaches and potential inconsistencies.
Exactly. The codification, it brought all that related guidance together in one logically organized place. It's like the FASB even suggests that just browsing the topical structure is the most efficient way to do research for most needs.
They're encouraging browsing over searching. Interesting.
It's only when you're looking for something super specific that they recommend using the text search feature. And this emphasis on browsing, it really highlights how important that organizational framework is.
So how is this massive collection of accounting guidance actually organized? It can't just be giant jumbled mess of rules, can it?
Oh, no, not at all. They came up with a pretty sophisticated, hybrid classification system. You can almost think of it like a super detailed library cataloging system for accounting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
And the key to understanding it all is this code, XXXYZZPP. So those first three digits, the XXX, that represents the topic. The next two, the YY, that's your subtopic. Then you've got two more, ZZ for the section. And finally, the last two, PP, are for the paragraph. And if you ever see an S before that section number, that tells you it's SEC-related content.
Okay, so that's the basic anatomy of a codification reference.
Yeah.
But what do those pieces actually mean? Let's break it down, starting with the foundation, those areas and topics.
Okay, so the areas, those are the broadest categories of accounting guidance, and there are 9 of them.
9 major buckets.
Yep. First up, you've got general principles. That covers all those fundamental concepts.
The bedrock of accounting.
Exactly. Then you've got presentation, which deals with, how financial information is actually presented.
Making it all look nice and understandable.
Then, of course, we've got assets, liabilities, and equity. Those cover the core balance sheet elements.
The bread and butter.
Then you've got revenue and expenses. Those address the income statement side of things. Broad transactions, that includes areas like business combinations, derivatives, and all that fun stuff. And finally, we've got industry, which provides guidance for specific sectors. So each of these areas, they have a range of topic numbers. General principles starts at 105, and it goes all the way up to the 900s for those industry-specific guidelines.
Okay, so 9 big areas covering the whole spectrum of accounting. And within those, we find topics. You mentioned leases earlier as an example.
Right. Topics are basically collections of all the guidance related to a specific subject. Now, here's something interesting. The FASB actually designed these topics to align pretty closely with the standards issued by the International Accounting Standards Board, the IASB.
Trying to make things a little easier for international comparisons.
Exactly. They made a conscious effort to make comparing US GAAP and international standards more straightforward, at least in some areas.
That makes a lot of sense in our globalized business world. So within a topic like leases, we then have subtopics. Why do they need even more division?
Well, subtopics provide a more granular level of detail within that topic. They often break down the guidance based on the type or the scope of the item you're looking at. So within leases, for example, you'd find subtopics like operating leases and finance leases, which used to be called capital leases. This lets them provide more targeted guidance depending on the situation.
I see. So it's getting more and more specific. And I've noticed that there's often an overall subtopic, usually with that nect of 10 at the end. What's the significance of that one?
Yes, the nect of 10 subtopic or the overall subtopic, you'll almost always find it within a topic. It usually has that fundamental overarching guidance that applies to, the entire topic, all its subtopics. You can think of it like those core principles. But sometimes you'll find some, I guess you could say, miscellaneous content in that overall subtopic, stuff that didn't neatly fit into those other more specific subtopics.
The catch-all category.
Pretty much. And it's important to note that industry topics, they often have subtopics that mirror those general topics, for consistency. So, for example, the general topic for receivables is 310. Now, if you look in the agriculture industry topic, that's 905, you'll find a subtopic called, agriculture receivables. And that's 905, 3 to know.
Okay, so if I'm dealing with receivables for an agricultural company, I might need to consult both the general receivables topic and the industry-specific agriculture receivables subtopic.
You got it. It's like cross-referencing, making sure you have the full picture for that specific industry.
It's a hierarchical structure built for precision.
Uh,
All right, we've gone from areas to topics to subtopics. Next, in our XXXYYZZPP code is the section. So what does that level represent?
Sections basically tell you what kind of accounting guidance you're looking at within a subtopic. They categorize the content based on which aspect of counting is being addressed. So you'll find sections for recognition, like when you should record an item in your financial statements.
Right.
There's also measurement, so how you should actually value that item. And then there's disclosure, that's all about what information needs to be presented to the people using the financial statements.
It's breaking down the guidance into digestible chunks. Are those sections pretty consistent across all the different subtopics? That would make things a lot easier to navigate.
They are, thankfully. Almost every subtopic uses the same standard set of sections, and they're numbered from 00 to 75.
Wow, a lot of potential sections.
Yeah, there's status, which tells you how current the guidance is, overview and background, objectives, scope. That defines what the subtopic actually applies to. Glossary, which defines key terms. And then you've got those big ones like recognition, which is section 25, initial measurement, section 30, subsequent measurement, 35, derecognition, that's when you remove an item, section 40, other presentation matters, 45, disclosure, 50, implementation guidance and illustrations, which is super helpful for applying the guidance, that's 55, relationships to other parts of the codification, that's 60, transition, how to apply new guidance, that's 65, then grandfather guidance, 70, and last but not least, XBRL elements, which we'll talk more about later, and that's section 75.
Wow, that's a mouthful. But you did mention earlier that not all of these sections will always show up, right?
Right. If a particular subtopic doesn't have anything to say about, let's say, derecognition, well, that section just won't appear. It's all about keeping things relevant.
Streamlined and efficient. I like it. So then we have subsections. These are an even further division within a section,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Subsections offer yet another layer of organization within a section. A lot of sections will have at least a general subsection, but in more complex areas, a section might be divided into multiple subsections to help you really zero in on what you need. For example, under the receivables overall section, you might have subsections for like acquisition, development, and construction arrangements.
So it helps filter the content even more. And these subsections, they don't have specific numbers like the sections, right?
Nope, they're just labels by their title.
Okay, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty now. After subsections come paragraph groups, and then finally the individual paragraphs. How do those two work?
Okay, so paragraph groups are basically collections of related paragraphs that are all grouped together under a common heading within a section or a subsection. And the codification allows you to nest these paragraph groups, which creates this hierarchical structure.
Like those Russian nesting dolls.
Exactly. You'll see those indentations marked with the greater than symbol, sometimes with little dots before it to show the level of hierarchy. So, for example, you might see a heading like Statement of Financial Position Classification of Income Tax Accounts, and then indented under that you might have Deferred Tax Accounts, and then indented even further, Deferred Tax Accounts related to an asset or liability.
It's all about that logical flow of information. And then finally, we have the individual paragraphs themselves.
Those are the smallest, most specific pieces of guidance. Each one gets a unique number, and that number is permanent. It never changes, even if they update the codification.
So if they need to add something new, how do they do that?
Well, they insert it between the existing paragraphs and use a letter extension. So if they needed to add something between paragraph 55 and 56, they'd create paragraph 55A. That way, any references to a specific paragraph number, they'll always stay valid, even after updates.
Smart. That avoids a lot of potential chaos. We talked earlier about the intersecting content with industry topics. Are there any other, like, stylistic or content-related things to watch out for within the codification?
Yeah, there are a few. The FASB, they really tried to standardize the language throughout the whole codification. For example, you'll always see the word entity used instead of company or organization or enterprise. And when there's a requirement, they almost always use shall instead of like should or must.
It's all about clarity and consistency.
Exactly. And they generally tried to get rid of any like vague or qualifying language.
It's all very black and white.
They're aiming for that.
What about the glossary? Accounting has a lot of specialized terms.
Oh, absolutely. The codification, it includes both subtopic-specific glossaries. You'll find those in section 20 of each subtopic. And then there's the master glossary. It's comprehensive, all the defined terms in one place. But the FASB, they really emphasize that when you're researching a subtopic, you should always start with the glossary that's specific to that subtopic.
So don't jump straight to the master glossary. Why is that?
Well, sometimes you'll find the same term in both, but there might be like subtle differences in the definition depending on the context.
Context matters, even with definitions.
That's
Makes
good.
sense. Now, you also mentioned the ability to join and combine content within the research system. How does that work?
So because those sections, remember, they follow a consistent structure across subtopics, the online tools that let you search the codification. They often allow you to pull together similar types of information. For instance, if you're looking at the disclosure requirements for a certain topic, you can often combine all the disclosure sections, that's section 50, from every subtopic within that topic into a single view.
So you don't have to click through each one
Right,
individually.
it saves a lot of time, yeah. And sometimes you can do something similar with subsections too, based on their titles. But one thing to remember is that when you choose to join all the content, section 75, which has the XBRL elements, it's usually excluded. You'd have to review that separately.
Good to know. Now, a concept that pops up all the time in accounting is materiality. How does the codification deal with that?
Materiality.
That
It's a big one.
Oh.
It's actually addressed in its own topic 105 under those general principles.
Oh.
The key takeaway is that materiality applies to all accounting standards, even if a specific standard doesn't come right out and say, if material.
So it's kind of implied in everything.
Exactly. The FASB even removed a bunch of those specific mentions of materiality throughout the codification because they didn't want people thinking it only applied in certain cases.
It was giving the wrong impression.
It's a judgment call you always have to make.
So materiality is always lurking in the background. Good to keep in mind. Now, accounting standards, they're not set in stone, are they? They change over time. How does the codification keep up with all the new pronouncements?
The ever-evolving world of accounting. New guidance comes out through what are called accounting standards updates, or ASUs for short. Yeah, basically these ASUs, they're like amendments to the codification. Each ASU has a summary of the changes, the actual revisions to the codification's wording, and then the FASB's basis for conclusions, which explains like the rationale for those changes. They're identified with a YYYYXX format, so like ASU 2024-15.
Okay, so we know how new guidance comes out, but within the codification itself, how do we know what's new or what's changed? Is there like a flag or something?
When the FASB issues an ASU that amends the codification, you might actually see both the original wording and the newly amended wording for a while until the new guidance is actually effective for everyone.
So there's a transition period.
Yeah, and during that time, the online systems for the codification, they usually highlight those new paragraphs as pending content, and they'll often have a link to the transition guidance in that ASU. Once the new guidance's effective date has passed, the old wording disappears, and so does that pending content label.
So it's pretty clear what's changing.
Yeah, they make it easy to track.
What about small things, though, like those minor corrections or clarifications that aren't really changing any accounting principles? How do they handle those?
Oh, for those, the FASB staff issues what they call maintenance updates. They're not formally voted on by the board, but they're necessary to keep the codification accurate and, well, user-friendly.
So it's all about making sure the codification is as up-to-date and accurate as possible.
Exactly.
You mentioned XBRL earlier. That was in relation to Section 75. Can you expand on that a bit? How does XBRL fit into all of this?
Sure. So you've got the GAAP financial reporting taxonomy and the SEC reporting taxonomy, which people usually just call the GAAP taxonomy. Essentially, these are standardized lists of computer-readable tags, and they use XBRL, which is, the extensible business reporting language.
XBRL, that's one used for SEC filings, right?
Yeah, public companies have to use these XBRL tags to categorize and label their financial statement information when they file with the SEC.
So how does this tie back into the codification?
Well, Section 75 of each subtopic, and then the corresponding S75 for the SEC-specific stuff, they list out the XBRL elements that are directly related to the guidance within that subtopic.
So it helps companies pick the right tags.
Exactly. It's all about making sure the XBRL tagging is accurate and consistent with the underlying GAAP.
Makes sense. It's all connected. Now, we've covered a ton of ground here. We talk about what the codification is, why they created it, that intricate structure, how they keep it updated, how it links to SEC reporting. So for those of us who need to reference the codification in our work, what's the proper way to do that?
Okay, so for those broad references that you might include in the notes to the financial statements, the FASB prefers that you use, clear, plain English that just identifies the relevant topic.
Keep it simple.
For example, you could say something like, as required by the leases topic of the FASB Accounting Standards Codification.
Straightforward and easy to understand. What about more detailed references, like if we're writing internal memos or research papers?
For those, the FASB recommends a more specific format. So you start with FASC ASC, and then you follow it with the precise codification reference. So if you wanted to cite the whole receivables topic, it would be FASB ASC topic 310 receivables. And if you need to reference a specific paragraph, like say paragraph 2 of section 15 in the receivables overall subtopic, it would be FASB ASC paragraph 310.10.15.2.
So there's a clear, consistent format for citations. Well, this has been an incredibly in-depth look at what can often seem like honestly, a bit of a black box. To sum it all up, the FASB codification, it's this meticulously structured and constantly updated source of authoritative US GAAP. And creating it, it was a huge step forward in streamlining accounting research and making sure accounting principles are applied consistently.
Absolutely. We went through how it's organized from those broad areas down to those very specific paragraphs, talked about the reasons behind each level, how it incorporates that SEC guidance, and the whole process of keeping it updated through ASUs. Hopefully now you have a much better grasp of how this all works.
Yeah, definitely a lot clearer now. And so here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering how massive the codification is and how it's constantly being updated, think about this. How could a deeper understanding of its structure not only help you quickly find answers to your accounting questions right now, but also help you anticipate those future changes in financial reporting?
It really is more than just a set of rules. It's a framework for thinking about how to apply accounting principles. So we encourage you to take what we talked about today and really dive into the areas of the codification that matter most to you, to your career.
Consider this a launch pad for a deeper understanding.
Absolutely. And remember, this is the foundation of US GAAP. So the more you know about it, the more confident you'll be.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep diving deep.